Hello all, welcome to another episode of Celestial Vibes channel. And today we are going to be dealing with one of the most important issues that astrologers face today, and it is the issue of house division. But we are not going to talk about the actual issue of house division, but we are going to talk about the integrated usage of two houses. So we have Charlie Obert here, and thank you so much for joining me. And it's an honor and a pleasure discussing with you.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be discussing with you. I'm looking forward to our talk here.
Sure. And I've been using whole sign house system basically ever since I started learning astrology in 2011. And as it is, Vedic astrology predominantly uses equal or whole sign, and it's most of the softwares that come today for Vedic astrology are mostly whole sign houses. So I've been using whole sign house system, and I've been taught by my grandfather only to use this specific system. So, but that's not the case in Western astrology, because Placidus is the most commonly used systems, and people are pretty much like used to use quadrant house systems rather than whole sign house system, which is probably a new development. I think ever since James Holden published a paper on the issue of house divisions in 1981 or 82 with the AFA. So I thought that was the first initiation of actual revival of Hellenistic astrology itself in a full swing before the initiation of Project Hindsight. But how do you see it? When did house division issue actually come in?
Well, the house division issue in the West, and I'm here in the United States, as you pointed out, most astrologers doing Western astrology start out with Placidus, or one of the other quadrant. By the way, we should probably start by defining what we mean by quadrant house system. Basically, house system, any house system, and there's several, where the ascendant, the degree of the ascendant marks the beginning of the first house, and the degree of the midheaven marks the beginning of the 10th house. And that divides the wheel up into the four divisions or quadrants, and then how each of those gets subdivided are what the different quadrant house systems are. And there have been different opinions here in the West as to what were the best house systems here. They were mostly quadrant house systems, but for a while, even earlier in the 20th century, a house system that is quite popular in England and Europe is the equal house system, which basically takes the degree of the ascendant and makes that same degree the start of each of the other houses, and each of the houses are 30 degrees. Is that a house system you were also familiar with, equal houses?
Yeah, exactly. So yes, exactly. But there is a very subtle difference between whole sign and the equal house system, where equal house system has the beginning of the ascendant, and from there they take 30 degrees as the first house. But in case of whole sign house system, the exact degree where the ascendant falls, it actually sums up the entire house as as the first house or the rising sign.
Yes, exactly. So that the start in whole sign, the start of the first house is the start of the sign, not the ascendant.
Exactly.
So you can have the ascendant somewhere in the middle of the first house. And what's a big switch for a lot of people when they're new to that is you can have planets in the first house that are above the ascendant.
Yeah.
And I think you're right that it would have been, I believe you said the 1980s, the paper of...
I think it's 1982.
Yeah, and he referred to it, I believe, as sign house or house sign system or something like that.
Yeah.
And the sense I get, as you also pointed out, is it really began to become, whole sign, began to become popular in the West, partly because of Project Hindsight, people like Robert Schmidt and Rob Hand, who did a lot to put it on the map. And then a little bit later, people like Chris Brennan and Ben Dykes, also use pretty much exclusively whole sign. So now you've got people who absolutely swear by whole sign being the best system in the world, and you've got people actually swear by quadrant being the only real house system. And you know, it's kind of really up in the air now.
Yeah, that is the issue that most of the astrologers are facing today, and especially the problem happens when you are actually making a transition from one house system to another house system. It's a very difficult transition to make because people
Yes.
tend to look at their own charts and they feel that this particular placement in their chart is much better, so that they don't want to switch to another house system. So this might be a very this might be an emotional attachment that people have with a particular house system. But I don't know if that is the right way, because I am no one to point someone wrong. So I'm not here to say someone is right or wrong. But the most important thing that appealed in your paper or article, and also Anthony Loius' article, is the actual integration stuff. So in spite of dealing with what's right and what's wrong, I thought it adds so much of value when we integrate two house systems, which is an integration is basically a major part of the work that I'm currently doing. So let's get back to this, and we'll talk a little bit about history, not a long history, but just a little bit, like at the beginning of the actual Hellenistic tradition of astrology. I've been reading in various places that whole sign house system was the predominantly used house system by the astrologers, like Dorotheus, Valens, and Ptolemy as well. But there are specific areas where they used quadrant house systems. But do you think? I think that's the way the Hellenistic astrology actually started. Is that right?
Yeah, that's my understanding too. Okay. Is that whole sign is definitely the house system that's predominant in Dorotheus, and Valens definitely predominant. My understanding, I'm not an expert on Ptolemy, but my understanding is that quadrant house systems trace back to Ptolemy, and Ptolemy used them mainly as a way of measuring the strength of planets. The whole concept of angularity, that any planet that's very close to one of the angles is very strong. When it's somewhere middling away from the angle, not as strong. And when it's getting far from the angle, what we call cadent, is when it's at the weakest. So that quadrant system, like I said, is a way of measuring strength of the planets. Is that your understanding also?
Yeah, I also heard that the ancient astrologers used it as a measure of length of life. So that was, I've heard that in some of the places, and I've also read in some of the articles on various websites. Okay, so yeah.
No, go ahead. You were going to say something?
No, I was actually waiting for you.
Oh, okay. I wanted to ask something, since you do primarily Vedic astrology. Is the midheaven used much in your astrology also, or is that a
no? The concept of IC, MC, and stuff, it's not prominent in Vedic astrology, but we use it as angular or Kendra houses, which have been attributed as strong houses in itself. So as it is in Western astrology, the exact degree where the IC or MC falls, the exact place where the particular thing falls on a chart, adds so much of value. But here we take it as the houses are itself very strong placement. So they are the strong houses, and planets that are placed in those houses have a lot to say in terms of the quality of life and the approach of a human towards their life. Depending upon the house, whether it is 1, 4, 7, and 10, depending upon the house in which a planet is placed.
That's one of the things that is part of the Western tradition also, is because of those two different concepts, is that there's two different meanings for angularity. So like if you're dealing with whole sign houses, one, sign per house, then from the ascendant, the angular house above the horizon would be the 10th sign or 90 degrees. And that's regardless of where the midheaven is. If you're using the quadrant house system, then angularity is how close to the midheaven something is. And sometimes when you go through the old texts and they talk about angularity, you're not sure of which sense of angularity they're referring to. So there's kind of an ambiguity, even, in the Western tradition, by the time you get to like the Persian period and then the Arabic period, that they obviously have both house systems, and sometimes in a given section, you can't tell exactly which house system they're referring to.
Okay. So,
Yeah, where the article I did, and which I think is the reason why we're talking, what I'm intrigued with now is the whole notion of using both whole sign houses and quadrant houses at the same time, and combining the two. And I was very interested to find the astrologer Anthony Loius pointed this out to me. And by the way, I noticed Anthony Loius also has an article in that recent issue of that journal you put out.
Yeah, that's on Vimshatri Dasan zodiacal releasing.
Right, which is, again, he's combining two different techniques.
Exactly, yes.
Positions. Yeah. Anyway, he pointed out to me that there is a very clear example in the Western astrologer Marinus of combining meanings from the two house systems at the same time. That's where the light bulb went on for me. That's where I thought, okay, it's not one or the other, it's both together.
Yeah.
Make sense?
You mentioned this in your article as well.
Mm-hmm. Although, would it be worth our taking a minute to take a look at that chart there?
Yeah, sure. 1 minute.
Okay. I'm gonna go ahead and turn on sharing here. Okay.
So before that, I just had one thing to ask
sure.
you. So
let me pause for a minute. Go ahead.
So there is a common understanding that quadrant house systems show a psychological perspective of a native, while the whole sign system and the actual 1 to 12 houses bring out various chapters, not various chapters, but various aspects of life and how it will fare about in a human's life. So how do you see the difference in terms of interpretative ideas of whole sign and quadrant house systems?
Okay. Well, first of all, that saying the quadrant is more psychological, and the whole sign, I guess you could say, more objective, more with different parts of life. I don't think it's that simple. I think it's just they're two different systems, and you'll sometimes have psychological topics that are in both, and you'll sometimes have, objective event topics in both. I haven't found a distinct, quadrant systems do one thing and whole signs do another. I don't have it. If there is that, I haven't sorted it out yet.
Okay.
Because I know, like, I can point to my chart and I can find psychological meanings with either, or I can find objective meanings. By the way, something I do want to mention before we look at this, and I think you've gone through this experience too. It's very, very common. As you said, astrologers in the West currently commonly start with Placidus. When they're first introduced to whole sign systems, it's like an identity crisis. It's like, oh my God, my chart has changed. Wait a minute, I'm totally used to my Saturn over in the 9th house. Now it's moved to the 10th house. What's going on? And it could be a big, kind of a tough transition for a lot of people. But then once you get used to it, it's another perspective. And what I think you and I have in common is instead of saying, oh, great, now I've discovered whole sign, that's the one true system, we can use the strengths and weaknesses of both.
Yeah, sure.
I'm getting feedback from people who are going, gee, I'm glad you're talking about both house systems because I switched to whole sign, but my chart still makes a lot of sense in Placidus, and I don't want to give that up.
Sure.
And I think we can have both, you know?
I think there are a few areas in your article where you clearly kind of established the meaning that a particular chart gives in both whole sign and also quadrant house systems. For example, you spoke about the 511 axis and the 612 axis in a woman's chart, which was that was the actual basement that kind of after that the article just took off. So yeah, I really love that part. So yeah, I think it's worth sharing the screen at this point. So that
good. Okay, I'm going to turn on share.
Sure.
And what I would like to do, I want to start with the historical example for Marinus that Anthony Loius pointed out to me. And then we could pull up that chart with the 5th, 6th, such axis, okay?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm starting to share my screen now. Here. Okay, you're seeing my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay. That, by the way, is the Hermit card from the Aleister Crowley Tarot deck that you're looking at there. Okay, let me pull this up here. Oh, let's see. Here we go. This is a chart out of the French astrologer Marinus that I have in wheel system here. Some of the planet placements is a little bit different in the book where Marinus refers to this, but the important planets in the same place. Oops, stop it. Hang on, I didn't want to zoom in there. Here we go. Let me take a minute to explain what's going on with this view here. I have this in 2 different house systems at the same time. On the inside wheel, those numbers are for the quadrant house system that is Regiomontanus. That would have been the one that Marinus was using. This is that angle that kind of slopes over to the left. That's the midheaven angle. Then on the outside ring, the signs and the numbers there, that is the whole sign houses. Okay? Now, in the text of Marinus, there's a very clear reference in this chart. In the upper right quadrant there, he's got Saturn and Saturn in Leo. And he talks about a couple configurations in the chart and said, in this particular chart, this is referring to the king, and he said that this is it's in the 8th house by what he would consider the regular house system there. But then he referred to it as being accidentally in the 9th house, which meant 9th house by whole sign. So what this signified was the death of the king in a foreign country. So that's combining 8th house, death, and 9th house, travel, and foreign lands. That's just very obviously using both house systems at the same time.
Yeah.
That blew my mind.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yes, it really does. And that's a case where it really isn't one or the other, but the combination of the two gives a unique meaning.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let me draw up that chart of the woman there. This woman, and it's okay if I talk about this, this is my daughter.
Okay.
And the interesting configuration here, you'll notice, stop with the mouse is jumping on me here. In the lower right corner there, you have Venus and the Sun and Mars pretty tightly conjunct, all in Aries. And then opposite that is Jupiter and Saturn also tightly conjunct in Libra. That's 5 of the 7 traditional planets in the chart. That opposition dominates the chart. And what is interesting here, I'm going to start in the outside ring. If you put this in whole sign houses, that is 6th house to 12th house axis, and my daughter's a nurse. That's exactly the kind of thing you'll see in the charts of nurses or people in service professions or healthcare professions, that kind of thing, is a strong 6th, 12th house. Yes. And she also, with 12th house, she was in a period where she was working in a facility that was basically senior citizen care, which would be a very 12th house kind of a thing.
Yeah, the so hospitality thing.
Yes, exactly. So that's profession, 6th to 12th house. It totally fits.
Yes.
But now you look at quadrant house system, and if you look at that one, then the Venus and Sun and Mars are all in the 5th house, and Mars and Jupiter are all in the 11th house. And the single most important thing in my daughter's life is her children. She has 2 daughters, and they're the center of everything. She just absolutely adores them. They're her highest value, and she loves spending time with them. And she's also extremely devoted to her friends and her groups of friends. Like she's mid-30s now. She will, if she hears that a friend of hers from college over 10 years before is getting married, she'll rearrange her schedule and drive halfway across the country to be at their wedding. So there's this extreme devotion to her children and her groups of friends, 5th, 11th axis. Right. So they're both at once.
Yeah.
And I know her very well. And this really is the case that if I leave out either one of those 2 meanings, I'm leaving out a big chunk of who my daughter is and what her life is all about there, you know? And another thing that I can't remember if I put this in the article or not, but something else that occurred to me when I was thinking about the meaning of that opposition there is, as I mentioned, my daughter's a nurse, and she's also very dedicated to her family and her children and groups of friends, so on. I think there's a similar kind of caring motivation in both of them. Okay. That it combines the same sort of wanting to nurture, wanting to take care of people, that kind of a thing. So it's like her nursing work is an extension of family, an extension of taking care of children and that kinds of thing. You can't draw a strict line between the two. So they really do kind of merge there.
Yeah, I think both the things need similar kind of attitude towards people. So.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So that's where that particular axis isn't just 5th house in 5th, 11th in one place and 6th, 12th in another place. It's both at once throughout her life, and it kind of, you mix those 2 together and it explains her strongest values. It's really, really interesting stuff.
Yeah, I never knew that both the house systems can be used together before reading your article and Anthony Loius's article. So I was immediately struck by the actual fascination of integrating various techniques of astrology.
Yeah. And that actually is why I wrote the article. That was my new piece. Okay. Instead of having to decide either one or the other, I could just do both at the same time. By the way, it's This is taking a little bit different angle, but there's something else that I did want to mention when I was thinking about this whole multiple house system issue.
Sure.
Now, I'm not an expert in Vedic astrology, not by any means, but at least what I do know about it is you're always whole sign, but you have multiple ways of dividing up the planets in houses depending on various topics. What we here in the West would call harmonic astrology.
Yeah,
right.
That is the divisional chart system in Vedic astrology, where we split each houses into various parts, and we call it as vargas. So we have a lot of divisional charts to specify a particular area of life. For example, we have the D10 chart, which is called as the Dashamsa chart for career and profession. So likewise, we have the D7 chart for Saptamsa, which relates to our children and the progeny and stuff. So there are so many things attached to the divisional charts as well. So there is a like D24 chart, so which is called as the Siddhamsa chart, where we can explore the education of a person based upon the planetary positions in that particular chart. So there are so many divisional charts which convey various messages or themes about a person's life regarding a specific area.
Yes, that makes sense. So for you and your tradition, to be looking at a couple house systems at the same time, it's not as much of a jump for someone here in the West who is used to just, there's one house system and that's it. You see what I mean? There's kind of more flexibility already built into your system there.
Yeah, based upon the division of charts, yes, but I don't know if there is if people can actually accept another house system. However, there is another system of astrology that actually took birth from Vedic astrology itself, because Vedic astrology is the mother of all the forms of astrology in India. So there is another system called KP system, which is called as the Krishnamurti Paddhati, developed by Mr. Krishnamurti. So there, the predominant house system is Placidus.
Oh, okay.
So people use Placidus house. Some of the KP astrologers, even one of my close colleagues and friend with whom I regularly work, uses Placidus house system and KP system of astrology. So there are a little bit of other house systems like Placidus, and equal is pretty much I don't know if it is still there, but not anyone whom I know use equal house system. So what we use as whole sign is basically the most predominantly used house system here.
That makes sense. Actually, the mentioning equal house system for a minute there. As I said, there's chunks of the Western astrology where that's quite a popular system also. Part of the reason for that is just because, as you're probably aware, when you're dealing with the quadrant house system, as you start getting into more northern latitudes, where you're further away from the equator, the size of the houses can vary wildly. Okay. And you could have, you know, one house that has like 15 degrees out of one zodiac sign, and another house that has 2 full signs in it or something like that. Equal house system is...
1 minute. Sorry for interrupting. Do you still have something more to share at this point?
Say that again?
Do you still have something more to share at this point with your screen?
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Okay. Sure. Okay.
I have other charts if you'd like to look at it. Just I did want to...
No, I just want to. I just wanted to ask you if you can stop screen sharing and then start again when you want to share the screen, so that people can see when you're talking.
Got you. Okay. Then how about I turn off my screen share? Let's talk for a while. Then I could turn it on if we go to another chart. Does that sound good?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Just a minute. Okay, we're back. Oh. I lost sound from you. Are you still hearing me okay?
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Good. I'm good now. Okay, just for about 10 seconds or so, I lost the sound. Okay, we're good.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there a particular issue or topic we should?
Like we were talking about like Placidus being the major house system and
Yes.
the usage of this in Western astrology, while Indians have been already using the whole sign house system, and due to the various divisions, there is a little bit of acceptability in terms of what Indians are using, but that's not the case.
Yes.
Western, yeah.
Yes. And actually, another thing that interests me, which is about the, it's related to the rediscovery of whole sign here in the West, which is also related, as you're aware of, to just the general recovery of Hellenistic astrology and techniques here in the West, is something else that I'm finding. And again, I'm not an expert on Vedic. I don't know a great deal about it. But what I do know about it is that there seem to be more similarities with the oldest Western astrology and Vedic astrology than there is with modern Western and Vedic. Does that match your experience also?
Yes, that's pretty much the same. I think Hellenistic astrology and Vedic astrology are very close. And whenever I have a conversation with my friend Lars Panaro, he says that both these traditions are like twin sisters, and and the other sister is just finding its way back to light. So I think after getting my texts, and especially after finding Chris Brennan's book, I got Chris Brennan's book. So this is like this gave a lot of idea of how much both the traditions have been similar in terms of usage of techniques and also practice. For example, if you see annual profections is very similar to the Nadi progressions that Indians use, which is used in Nadi astrology. And Sudarshan Chakra is a chakra, is a chart where we have the ascendant, the perspective from ascendant, perspective from sun, and perspective from moon as a it is an embossed chart. So we can see all the three charts in like one screen. So it is a superimposed chart. So there we have a similar kind of progression, like time lord progression, which is very close to annual profections. So,
yes.
But I still wonder how come Indian astrology kind of practiced one house system, or just like not more than 3 or 4 house systems for various purposes. So so do you want to say about some of the quadrant house system, various quadrant house systems like Regiomontanus and Placidus and the other, some of the most prominently used house systems in modern astrology? So Porphyry is one of those. I think Porphyry is the most dominant house system that is being used by evolutionary astrologers.
Yes, and that's because Jeff Green, who started that, that's his favorite system. And he's one of the most influential people in evolutionary. And it's very interesting. I've recently started using Porphyry quite a bit, but I'm familiar with Jeff Green's work, but I'm not an evolutionary astrologer. But the reason why I've done that is well, I'm very interested in chart mathematics and the theory of the different house systems, that kind of thing. And there's a very good astrologer named Bruce Schofield, who you might have heard of. In one of his books on the chart mathematics, he talked about having done a study using many of the most common kinds of quadrant house systems to figure out with which of them do the intermediate house cusps actually have some sort of timing purpose. So like, given that they all have ascendant and midheaven axes the same, which of the different house systems can you time like the second house cusp, third house cusp, fifth and sixth, and so on? And the house system that he found worked out best was Porphyry. So that's why I went to that. And my understanding is that that is one of the older house systems, and that one goes back to Ptolemy. Again, I'm not an expert on Ptolemy with this, but that's my understanding. Anyway. But there will, if you get a group of astrologers here in the West at a convention or something, if you want to start a fight, just say, I do XYZ house system and it's the only real one. That'll be it. And part of the work that I'm doing, and I think you're doing a similar thing, we should be combining these and working with the strengths of each rather than trying to figure out which is the right one and which one's the wrong one.
Yeah, I don't think there's any right and wrong stuff in astrology itself. So, and no, there is, as it is, there is no scientific rationale to prove that something is wrong. So I don't really agree with the concept that there is something really wrong in astrology, but it is something what we like to work with. It's not even what works for us, but I think it's what we like to work with. So at that particular point of time, so perceptions change and times keep changing. And tomorrow, as it is, I was reading only the Vedic astrology books and some of the Nadi books, but now the only texts that I'm reading are Hellenistic stuff. So maybe tomorrow, after 5 or 6 years, I might be doing something else. So there is no point in talking about what's right or what's wrong. So that's my perception of dealing with astrology.
Yeah, there's also, as you also know, it's part of just the way human minds work is give us a system to work with and we'll make sense of it.
Okay.
And this is another reason why I'm flexible with house systems, but I have a very close friend who's an astrologer, and this in a period where I did a reading for her. And at this point, I was doing straight traditional astrology. I didn't use any of the modern planets, Uranus, Neptune, or Pluto. I was using only traditional astrology techniques, and I did a reading for her. And what she told me afterwards is she had had a reading from Mark Jones. Okay. Now, Mark Jones is a fairly well-known evolutionary astrologer, and he uses the modern planets, and he used a different house system than I used, and he used a different set of techniques. And she said when she went to reading from him, he came up with a lot of the same themes.
Okay. Yeah,
so we had two different systems, two different vocabularies, and we kind of got at the same stuff.
Yeah.
That's really saying something.
Yeah, sure. So the other things, okay, I think it's time for you to share one more chart if you have time for that.
I would be happy to. I'm going to turn on share and then go into the folder and we'll pick out one there.
Sure.
Actually, what I would, I know. I think I'm going to share one that's a contemporary, one that I think people would know now.
Sure.
Okay, share. My screen's back on, right?
Yeah.
Okay. This is the chart of Pope Francis.
Okay.
The current chart of the current Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. And just the thing that struck me here, what I wanted to look at, is you'll notice that over on the west side of the chart in Capricorn there, you have Jupiter, who is in Capricorn. And a couple of houses up, you have Saturn in Pisces. So Jupiter and Saturn have mutual reception. So Jupiter's in a sign that Saturn rules. Saturn's in a sign that Jupiter rules. And there's a really strong influence back and forth with those. And this is a case where I think crossing house systems says a lot about it. Because you have Jupiter in the 6th house, and this is in Placidus in the way I have it drawn here. Jupiter in 6th house in mutual reception with Saturn, who in whole sign is in the ninth house.
Ninth house.
Right. And sixth house plus ninth house is a lot of the way Pope Francis presents his concept of the church. It's kind of, you know, church for the working people, that kind of thing. He's known for having, he's much less ceremonial than previous popes have been. His attire is much more simple. His living quarters are much more simple. There's a sixth house quality to the man, but that combines with that ninth house Saturn. Ninth house is the natural house for the church and for religion. And Saturn is traditional church. So this is the case where sixth house in one system, ninth house in the other system really combine very, very nicely.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I think we could say about that Saturn, and Saturn would be representing an old traditional church. Saturn is ninth house in the sense of it's the natural house of religion.
Yeah.
But Saturn by Placidus is in the eighth house, which is a very difficult house. It's a house that's considered to be idle. It's a house where the planets don't have a lot of strength. And Francis is dealing with the Catholic Church in a time where they're dealing with eighth house kinds of issues, with having lost a lot of their influence, things like that. So you mix the different house systems together and you get kind of a depth of meaning that you don't get otherwise.
Yeah, I think it offers multi-dimensional viewpoints in terms of the life of a native at various times.
Yes, and multi-dimensional is a good way to put it. I want to come back while we got the chart here. Do you see what I mean, where I don't think it's a simple matter of one of the systems is psychological and the other system's objective? I think it's more subtle than that. I think there's combinations of both in both systems. And as we're both figuring out, you can combine them and find really interesting stuff.
Sure. I think this is one of the most interesting things that I've seen of late. So I never had this view in terms of integrating various techniques. So this is actually a new opening, and hopefully not just for me, but for the entire astrological community itself.
I hope so. Actually, my own hunch is I'm not the only person doing this. I think other people are discovering this also.
Okay.
Just because, well, this wheel that I have on the screen here, this is a chart wheel that was developed with the most recent version of the astrology program, Janus. Okay. And here it is, a wheel showing two house systems at the same time. Yeah. Well, if they're showing it as part of the program, it means there's other people using it, you know?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's an indication of that people have started using it. Yes, and that's the reason why the software company has actually done this development.
Right. So hopefully, what we're doing here is basically spreading the news about a very, very useful new way to look at charts and get more meaning out of it. Anyway, I've done what I needed to, so I'm going to turn off my share for a bit here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And kind of a larger part of this using multiple house systems that I think something we're both working on here, and that is part of that article of Anthony Loius there, is combining techniques and seeing how the two of them together can shed light together, not having to keep them separate. Like the Anthony Loius article in your magazine, where he's combining a Hellenistic technique with a Vedic technique, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, and using the two at the same
That's
time.
the Dasha and Zodiacal releasing one.
Yes. So this combining of systems and looking at it, it's multiple perspectives at the same time. It's kind of, I'd call it like a stereo perspective, so that you're seeing a chart from two different angles at the same time. You combine them, you get more subtlety. And that also means we can quit fighting about which is the best house system, right?
Yeah, I think that's the call for the day. So we should probably quit fighting on whichever house system is the best. So, do you have anything more to say? But I think this is probably a very like, it's an eye-opening video or session that we had at this point, so that it reaches many people in terms of how to integrate two house systems. And hopefully this will not be the first time we'll be meeting discussing the house systems.
Yes, and I'd enjoy talking about this or talking about other things in the future. I think we covered some useful stuff here, and I hope your listeners, find useful food for thought with what we've talked about here.
Yeah, sure. I'll share the link to this article and link to your website, and I'm sure people will find the article as a very good supplement along with this video. So I think it will be a very good idea. So, and we'll come together sometime discussing the other topics in terms of integrating various techniques.
Very, very good.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
And thank you. It's been a pleasure talking with you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Okay.